Before jumping directly into a new oil painting, I wanted to practice a bit more of my glazing technique by making a little oil study in this sketchbook. This sketchbook, I bought it recently before going on a trip to Greece, and I did some sketches while I was there. It is a moleskine one, quite an expensive one, and actually it is a notebook and not really a sketchbook. But the page and the quality of the paper is really pleasant, and I've seen recently a lot of artists oil painting into moleskine books. Maybe not in a notebook, but once back from my trip, as I didn't really know what to do with it, I decided that I would try to oil paint in it. Also, the size is quite small, so I thought the dimension would be perfect to train my oil skill without wasting too much oil paint and mediums, since it is quite expensive. So I gessoed one of the page in thick layers. I think I put about 4 layers of gesso to be sure that it will hold well the oil paint. But now I'm not sure if with time the paper will resist. Probably, if it is not, I will have to tear off the page and glue it on a hard surface like wood at one point. Painting in thin layers and using glazing technique is my new thing at this moment. It doesn't mean that I won't go back one day to a la prima technique, but I prefer for the moment devoting my time to this technique since it really allows you to take your time with oil paint, to layering little by little, and to develop as well the subject and the figure of your painting while doing it. It gives as well a nice and glossy effect to the painting that sometimes it is difficult to get with a la prima technique. But I won't today give you a full explanation of how I'm going to proceed. If you want to know more about glazing technique, little disclaimer, I'm still on the learning curve, but if you still want to know more on how I'm doing it, please check one of my earliest video where I explain everything about my process. I will put a link to this video in the comment section below. Today I want to talk more about the subject and the composition of this painting and how I used reference images to achieve the painting. The subject is very imaginative, to say the least, since it is the portrait of a young man with two horns. The motif of the horns and the signification of horns in ancient paintings, myth, and even history really piqued my interest recently. I think it is because I stumbled upon these images of Alexander the Great depicted with horns. I will insert some pictures here on the screen. And I was wondering how come that an historical figure of the past, not a myth, but a real person, came to be represented with horns on coins, but also in sculptures. Reading as well through the Bible, especially the Old Testament, which is always a great source of historical and not only spiritual information, Alexander the Great is the next master of the corner of the world after the Babylonian Nebuchadnezzar, opening the reign of the Greek. And we all know the history. After the Greek will come the Romans. In one of the visions of Daniel, a very famous prophet, it is said that one of his visions announced the coming of Alexander the Great, and the metaphor used to describe Alexander the Great was the horn, only one in Daniel's vision. But from the Greek history side, the horns, two from the Greek side, represent an artistic tradition associated with power from the gods. Alexander the Great was assimilated as a god with a divine lineage. Two stories different, but the same result, the representation of Alexander the Great with horns. And it seems in the Greek ancient time, each time that you would represent Alexander the Great, the presence of the horns were most of the time systematic. Horns are a representation of power in general since mythical and biblical times, but I do think that there is a difference between a symbol and the systematic representation of a portrait of a human with horns, as if the so-called person has real horns in the reality. Would it mean that during this ancient time people were just lying, representing people with attributes that they don't have in reality? Or maybe Alexander the Great has some artificial horns that he would put on his head to simulate a head with horns? Or would it not be simply that Alexander the Great had real horns on his head? This question seems quite absurd, and nobody now would believe that someone would have actual horn growing from his head. But really, who knows? As humans now, nobody can really testify what was happening during those times. We had some books, there are many ruins around us, some incredible and huge ruins actually. And we all wonder how these ancient people were able to build up massive cities and fortresses or castles high up in the mountains. How? Sometimes I feel that we are now very prideful, thinking that our civilization is at its peak and powerful. And I thought the same when I was younger. And the more I get older, the more I can see that these ancient people were actually more intelligent and capable than us regarding art, architecture, and many other things with crafting abilities that we don't have anymore. They were definitely more powerful, it seems. So I want to believe now that Alexander the Great had real horns on his head, even if you might think that I'm stupid or completely delusional. I'm okay with it. So this is the subject of the painting I'm doing, my representation of a chimerical face of a young man with two horns inspired by my little reflection on Alexander the Great and the great people from the past. Now I will talk a bit about how I used reference images to get the result of this painting. I will show you now the mood board I used. Here it is. You might think that how from so many different images, which really sometimes don't have any link to each other, I managed to create the image I wanted. I first did a draft sketch of what I have in my mind. My objective was really trying to paint a frontal portrait, like a miniature with many details, a bit like those kind of old paintings where the characters are always wearing beautiful fabric clothes and jewels. They usually look in front of, directly to the viewer. We see only the upper parts, and the main focus is the features, the eyes, the lips. The expression of the face, to sum up, is really important. In my case, I wanted my Alexander to have a little smile and a frank look, but overall, I wanted him to have a serious look which corresponds to his powerful functions, something a bit official. So the horns, but also the rich fabric clothes and the jewels, would symbolize as well the power, and have to figure out how to draw and paint these attributes. This is why reference images can be very useful. As you can see, I have the ideas and a clear image in my mind, and the reference images I was looking for had to fit these imaginative representations and not the other way around. Using reference images can be a trap. You find a nice image, you will follow the image and think you will tweak it a bit and modify it a bit, but the result won't, unfortunately, not come from your mind. You really have to train yourself to imagine your subject in your mind, to train your imaginations. Reference images or paintings or any art should inspire you, but you should integrate and not copy the references. So my Alexander, I imagined it with short wavy hair. So for this I look for young male pictures, in Pinterest of course, with this type of hair. I used this image as well, but this time more for the features of the face. I wanted my Alexander to have a long nose and clear eyes like this handsome young man, but not long hair. And also it was a reference for the shadow and the skin tones of my portrait. Then for the horns, I found this probably AI generated portrait. I don't like using this kind of images, but it is just for the horns I'm using it. So you see, I need in total 3 portraits that I smashed up to get the features and the face I wanted. And also the overall colors of these 3 pictures fit my colors palette, a desaturated palette with brownish and warm tones, which look old and classical. Regarding the clothes, I was not sure yet what kind of clothes my Alexander would wear. I was thinking at first as a type of white gown that you can find in antiquity, but finally I decided to go for a more embroidered type of tunic, and I followed this image reference, which has a yellow warm tone and with little embroideries like a little star shaped. It was really fun actually to paint this part of the painting. Then for the jewel, I decided that I needed to break with the warm tones of this palette. I could have chosen a gold jewel with a warm light to harmonize the color, but I decided to break these rules and put instead a cool tone type of jewel because I had in mind to execute this last glazing effect with a purplish white light who will enlighten the face of my character and probably accentuates his powerful figure. To create this effect that you will see later on, I have to wet the painting to dry completely. Then I added little by little the final colors and rubbing immediately the color to get this glowing effect. I could have added more of it, but I think it was a bit nerve-wracking. I was really scared to destroy my painting or change it completely, but I think next time I will try to be bolder with the final glaze effect, especially for shadow and light. You will notice as well that I didn't use sanding paper for this painting. As I was working on a thin paper, I didn't want to tear off the paper by sanding it down, so I worked only with very thin layers, rubbing off the paints when it was too thick, waiting for the painting to dry and continuing with the next layer. It is this way I achieved this smooth finish that I really like. As a conclusion, I think I'm starting to really appreciate this glazing technique, and I can see how painting this way can really give you so many possibilities. I will continue this way for my next painting that I already started, another horn related one actually, but it will be for the next time. I will let you watch the rest of the video now. Please let me know about your oil painting techniques in the comment section below. Thank you for watching and bye bye.